Rachel, bonjour. Thank you so much for joining me in my podcast, Lucky Last.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Let me introduce you briefly and then we will share your journey and your story. You are the founder and the CEO of Lokahi Foundation. This charity helps women and children who have been victim or are victim of family and domestic violence.
Yeah, that's right. We support any women and children in the eastern suburbs impacted by domestic and family abuse.
Okay. Your goal is to make sure that these women can regain control of their own lives and thrive in a stable and safe environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, leaving the abusive relationship is one part of it. And what I saw through my own experience is that a lot of organizations helped women to leave or just after they had left to get into some safe or stable accommodation, but then their support ended. And we know that one, domestic abuse doesn't end when we leave, but two, we want to help these women to move forward with their lives. It's not just about escaping, it's about then getting some counselling, making sure that they can get into employment if they want to, can be educated, retrained, whatever it is that they choose, so that they can actually live a life free from abuse, and so that that level of financial control from his side is much less.
Yeah, okay. So you founded Lokahi Foundation in 2013?
2016.
Okay.
Yeah.
After yourself, you've been a victim of domestic violence and you left your situation with your twins. They were 2 years old at that time.
They were.
And try to find a better place to go. You as well mentioned that you lived in 7 houses for the first 5 weeks.
Yes.
And you wish that you had someone who could help you out and follow your steps and help you transition to a safer environment.
Yeah, so basically, we left an abusive relationship. We had 5 different homes in 7 weeks. I was traipsing around with my twins. We were homeless. We were living in a friend of a friend's. Then we were in a motel. Then we were in crisis accommodation, similar to a refuge, before we finally found our own place to rent. And the one thing that really kept me going through all of that when everything was going wrong, and I mean everything. My pram broke in 2 while my kids were asleep inside it. My friends hired a car for me so I could go and look at rental properties, and that got towed away from outside the motel we were staying in because it became a no stopping zone on the Monday morning. My ex-husband put the children on the family law watch list the night before we were due to fly back to England for a holiday, so I missed my oldest friend's wedding. Just everything kept going wrong. And the one thing that was stable, the one thing that kept me going, the one thing that reminded me not just why I'd left, but where I was heading to, was my caseworker. Yeah. And so I kind of recognized really early on that that relationship was key, and that, she was this integral part of my life. And we built this very trusting relationship. And then when I moved from the eastern suburbs to Cronulla to be safe and for a little bit of distance from the east for a while, she wasn't officially allowed to be my caseworker anymore because I wasn't in her area. And that I found heartbreaking because I didn't want to share my story with somebody else. It's very re-traumatizing to do that. Half the time you don't remember what's happened during that crisis period. Your PTSD has kicked in and all of those memories are locked away for our own well-being. And so I wanted to set up something that it didn't matter where women moved to, for safety, for affordability, for family support, whatever their reason, we could still support them wherever they moved to.
So was it at that time between 2013 and 2016 that you realized that something needed to be done, that better structure and support needed to be created? Or how did it work? How did you come to Lokahi?
I guess I just, once I'd moved into my new safe place in Cronulla and the boys and I had kind of settled in there, I wanted to do something to help other women and children. And I really recognized from my own friendship group in the eastern suburbs that there was actually a lot more domestic violence and domestic abuse happening that wasn't reported. And so, when I went to speak to police about what was going on, the statistics said that the eastern suburbs had really low rates, but that wasn't what I was seeing in my life here. And so I wanted to do something else, and I considered retraining as a family lawyer, But even part-time, a lot of that was on Saturdays. My family are all overseas in England, so I didn't have anybody to help me with the children. They weren't even in daycare at that time. And so I thought, well, what if I made sure that everyone had a caseworker like mine? What if, everyone could have that key relationship, but that we change things? Because the more I spoke to her and realized that, support was generally only offered for 6 to 12 months. And that's all based on lack of funding. It wasn't services choices to stop supporting women. But, this lack of funding meant they would 12 months max, you couldn't move out of the area. All of these boundaries put in place that actually stopped these women from getting long-term support. So I thought, okay, what if I set up a service where we focus solely on case management? We're not doing 20 different projects at once. Our whole focus is on case management. I believe that that's what really saves lives, and that no matter where these women move to, we can support them, and we can support them for as long as they need. So for some clients, they're with us for a couple of months. Others have been with us for 3.5 years since we opened our doors.
You touched on something very important, I think. You said that you found out that actually in your entourage there were way more domestic violence than what is said or what has been reported. I would like to pick your brain on that. I would like to ask you, do you think is it because some women don't realize that it's domestic violence and abuse, or are just used to it, reproducing the same mechanism that they saw when they were children? Or do you think that there is as well the fear of just reporting it?
I think it's all of them. So I think I was having a conversation with a guy yesterday who worked for Western Sydney Wanderers Football Club.
Yes.
And we were talking about, the different areas, and sometimes we see in different areas of affluency or location that there's different forms of domestic abuse. So in the eastern suburbs, we still see physical abuse. I don't want to discount that there is still plenty of physical violence, but we see a lot higher levels of coercive control and financial abuse than we may see in lower socioeconomic areas where there just isn't the funds for the level of financial control. Again, doesn't mean there's not financial abuse there, but it's that level. So I think it's that women still don't recognise to this day that a domestic violence relationship isn't just physical violence. So they're starting to understand now about coercive control. Now it's been criminalised. They understand the verbal abuse. They might even understand the financial abuse. But they will still try to justify that he hasn't hit them. No. So that's one thing. And I think certainly in these more affluent areas, lower North Shore, Northern Beaches, eastern suburbs, what we see is that because of the level of coercive control and financial abuse, that it's difficult to leave because of what happens post-separation. So they leave, they lose their house, they lose their car, they often haven't worked for a long time because they've been raising their children, and then he cuts off all the finances, and he doesn't just cut off their access to money, he cuts off the school education fees. And these women are so dedicated to their families, as we all are once we become mums, that they don't want their children's education to be impacted. But the perpetrators don't care, because for them it's just about control.
Yes. So I will definitely come back to your story and Lokahi Foundation, but I think you mentioned something very important here. I know that this is now a priority for the government to work on domestic violence and try to improve the current situation in Australia. So I was just looking at it yesterday, and it said that in Australia, 1 in 6 women have experienced physical or sexual abuse by a current or former partner, and on average, 1 woman every 9 days is killed by a partner.
That's not actually true anymore.
Okay.
So we used to say last year, on average, 1 woman a week.
Yes.
This year, the rates are so high, it's 1 woman every 4 days.
Okay.
So, every 4 days, 1 woman is being murdered by a current or former partner. And I think I just saw an update yesterday that of some more children that had been murdered this week. And obviously we had the case recently where the mother actually murdered the children as well, which for some reason has not been called domestic violence by the media, and that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. These numbers are really frightening, very worrying. I listen, I do believe that it's getting more and more every year. I might be wrong, but I just feel like this number is increasing. I'm from France. I do believe that the numbers in France is much higher. I think like every other day we see terrible things happening in France. Do you think the authorities are doing enough? And what could we do to improve the situation? I guess there is a lot of prevention that needs to be done, but what is your 2 cents on that?
I don't think the state or the federal government are doing enough.
Okay.
I think, the federal government just had their announcement after the National Cabinet for 4.7 billion over the next 5 years. But when you break that down, it's nowhere near enough.
Yeah.
It's taken them most of the year to acknowledge that frontline services are underfunded. As you're aware, we lost our federal government funding in late February, early March,
yeah.
and that won't be reinstated. There is no further conversation, that's done. State government tell us that there's no funding available. The next round of funding that we could possibly apply for from New South Wales government will be in 2026. So where does that leave services like ours? Well, it leaves them with no ability to support these women. So at the time when the federal government withdrew all of their funding from us, we had 35 women that we were supporting and there was nowhere to refer them to. So the government have to do more. They also don't listen to the experts. So they recently put together, or fairly recently, a rapid review approaches panel, and that was made up of academics, journalists, and no disrespect to those people, they are all experts in their fields, but no frontline workers, no frontline experts, so no peak bodies, no workers, no lived experience.
Yeah.
And yet the National Plan to End Domestic and Family Violence that was written in 2022, which is supposed to end domestic violence in our country within 10 years or one generation, talks about the importance of lived expertise. So, they write these things, but then they overlook them.
Yeah.
And it's always a reactive response rather than a
Yes.
proactive response. And that's what we need. My belief is that if we're going to tackle this problem, it's a 3-pronged attack. It's education in schools, and that starts from kindergarten. And, we actually run an education program where we go into schools and I share my story, but I wouldn't be doing that with kindergartens. It's talking about healthy and respectful relationships. And it should be, in my opinion, year on year,
Yes.
run by experts, not run by teachers. We cannot keep pushing these things onto teachers. We should have people going in and teaching in the schools. And if that's built on year, we have a hope of changing the behaviours of that next generation. Secondly, frontline services. So, caseworkers, counsellors, refuges, women need somewhere safe to go and they need support to move forward. We can't just give them a safe house because they go back to the relationship.
Yes.
We have to give them both. And the third thing is more consequences for perpetrators. Because when I go and tell my story in schools, one of the first things these teenage boys ask me is either how long did he go to jail for, or is he still in jail?
Yeah.
And when I tell them, no, none of that happened, and I say, we recently had a client whose ex was found guilty of 9 charges of domestic violence, from stalking and intimidating to assaults, and he got an intensive corrections order, which the courts call jail time in the community. It's not jail time in the community.
Yes.
It's checking with corrections once or twice a fortnight.
Yes. So we are definitely far behind, and I think it's not only Australia, it's everywhere in the world. It's pretty shocking. I think there is so much that should be done before it should start very early. We should do some prevention very early.
Absolutely.
I'm actually very heartbroken because I was looking at one of your interviews on TV about this funding, and the response from the government was like they were going to look into it and make sure that you are not, going to be without funds, and you're just telling me that they shut down your funding.
Yeah, there was no further conversation. Everything that they were saying in public was not what was happening behind closed doors. And actually, the Department of Social Services, who overran our funding, from when we lost our funding, they followed up a week later, and fortunately for us, a private philanthropist came forward. So they followed up a week later to see if we needed this small amount of funding that they had offered to pay out our staff and close down. And then we didn't hear from anybody for probably 3 or 4 months, nobody checked in on our clients, on my staff, on anybody's well-being. They just didn't care. And that's really, really sad.
So you are relying on private funding at the moment?
We are, yes. We're very blessed that our fairy godfather came forward. He gave us funding to stay open for this financial year, and he's offered funding for the next 3 years.
Okay.
But, you know, it's still not enough for the need that's there, but we are so grateful to have him.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay. Now, come back to your journey. So you started to create Lokahi Foundation, but I guess you didn't have much experience in this matter, like creating something like a foundation, getting funding, etc. How did you manage all that?
No, I had no experience at all. I was a primary teacher years before, and my kids were, 3 when I was starting Lokahi, and I'd been a stay-at-home mum since they were born. I think I just had this idea and a belief that I could pull it off. Because it was the right thing to do. So I spoke to friends, I met people along the journey and kind of dragged them onto our board, and they helped. I set up an ABN and an ACN, and then I registered as a charity, and I just tried to do it bit by bit. And then the kind of big puzzle piece that was missing was always the funding. And one day a friend of mine who had been one of our chairs during the journey introduced me to Dave Sharma, who was running as the federal member. So he had lost his seat to Karen Phelps, and they had a small amount of funding, Liberal had a small amount of funding before it went to the next election, which was coming up. And basically, once I'd met up with him and talked about Lokahi, that small amount of funding turned into 180,000. So he went and found some alternate funding, and that allowed us to open our doors. And he then advocated for us to maintain that funding over the next 3 years. So he really was a lifesaver, and I don't think people realise, how much of a difference he made to this service existing.
No, not at all. Okay, that's good to know and recognize it. Thank you. So how do you manage all of that? Because you are working in a heavy environment, if I can say it like
absolutely.
that. It's not easy every day. You probably see terrible things. How do you maintain your enthusiasm about it? How do you maintain a healthy life with your family and your kids? How can you do all of that?
But I don't know that I ever have the right balance. I think my children would tell you that I'm not as involved and as present as I used to be. I try and remind them now, they're nearly 12, that for the first pretty much 7 years of their life, I didn't miss one part of anything. So if I'm not at a basketball game for 1 week, they don't need to make me feel like I'm the worst mother ever. And we try and balance it. I generally take a week off every school holidays so that we have time together. We took a mental health day together last Friday. Maybe I shouldn't say that in case their school find out. But we went shopping and then went to a trampoline park, and it was really important. It's really important to maintain those bonds. But I think what keeps me enthusiastic is that it keeps happening. And, that the people that could make great decisions and fund services effectively and have some ability to stop this aren't doing the right things. But the more women that come through our service, the more it drives me to keep doing what I'm doing, because it isn't stopping. And, I want these women to move forward. And I think because I'm a survivor myself, it gives them some hope that you can actually move forward. And that you can, build a different life for yourself. And in terms of what I do for my self-care, I was just telling you, I do my sunrise dips on a Friday with the Bondi Beach Babes. That actually is amazing. We literally just get in the water for 3 minutes, get out and go and have a cup of tea together. But
That's nice.
It's just something small on a Friday morning. It's a great way to start the day. I used to do a lot of exercise. Now you can see not quite so much. But, I watch a lot of junk TV. You'll always find me with my iPad and Netflix and a cup of tea. And it's really important that we also recognise that vicarious trauma does take a toll. So making sure that there's counselling in place, and also knowing when you need to take some time off, not just with the children, but for yourself, and setting those boundaries.
Your children are your family, and you're from England, so when you arrived here, you were by yourself with your children, I guess, after this situation. Did the community help you find a sense of family and belonging?
I think it was really hard because I think when you've been in an abusive relationship, you're often very isolated. So I had a mum's group that everybody has twins that I was part of. And so a few of those mums were really integral in our survival. One mum and dad helped us to find the first place to escape to, and I still credit them with kind of saving our lives. So they were very actively involved through that whole crisis period, and we're still in touch now. But you don't have a lot of support because you don't have any friends. You've been isolated from them. And now with what I do, you know, I don't have a huge friendship group because it's really hard to have normal conversations about everyday mundane life when you see what I see at work. You know, everything else kind of seems really irrelevant, and it's not, you know, but you don't want to hear about people whinging because, you know, they're something minor.
Yes.
It's just not important to me. But I repartnered almost 7 years ago, and he's an amazing stepdad and a great partner. He's very supportive of what I do, and he allows me to do what I do whenever I want to or need to do it. So, you know, I have him, and even though my mum and stepdad are overseas, you know, that my mum is very supportive. So, you know, I'm very lucky to have the friends that I do have. Yeah.
Who is the most influential person in your life at the moment, and how did they impact you?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, I don't know. I don't know that there's one. I think there's some amazing women in this sector, and we just had our peak body, which is called Domestic Violence New South Wales, had their conference last week. It's a biannual conference. So all of the amazing people in the sector that I have a lot of respect there were there last week, and there's a few key people in this sector who really are the ones that inspire me to keep doing what I'm doing. You know, I think sometimes we as women don't do enough to support other women, and I spoke about that on a panel last week. Is we have to have each other's backs, and the women that I really respect in our sector do that. You know, they don't just talk the talk, they walk the walk. And so I think they're the most influential people, is because, you know, they have been doing this for much longer than I have. Everybody has different life experiences. Some of them have lived experience, some of them don't, but they do a fantastic job, and it makes me want to keep doing what I'm doing.
Fair enough. Funding a charity, you said it before, it's not easy. What was your biggest challenge? Is it the funding?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's the funding, is, you know, because people want to help, but obviously now even more so than previously, cost of living is so expensive that people just aren't donating to charities in the way that they used to. But corporates are still making lots of money, so it's about how we make those connections with corporates so that they can fund some of what we're doing. So that's a huge issue. And then the other issue, I think, is acknowledging that there is such a huge issue in our area. Like, we constantly have a waiting list of 6 to 8 weeks to access a caseworker. I've gone from having 2 caseworkers last year to having 4 this year, and myself working, and we still can't meet the demand. But, you know, we're being told by the government this is a non-demand driven service. So trying to kind of break that rhetoric and, you know, make sure that people realise that affluent areas still have domestic abuse, and that services like ours are imperative and so needed to help these women to move forward.
It's not easy. You're trying to provide for everyone while not having the funds. You must be juggling all the time. I'm just impressed by your enthusiasm and your happiness and your dedication to it. What I noticed with people that I interviewed is women who are going to push through and go through everything if they know they are going to help someone else. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
What would you recommend to anyone who is struggling right now, not happy where they are at the moment, trying to push through and achieve their dreams or their goals?
Well, like we said before, don't set up a charity.
Did you hear that?
Much too hard work. No, I think, like, make sure that you surround yourself with some positive people, you know, find yourself a mentor or find somebody that believes in you, whether that's a friend or a family member, or you have to go on social media and find somebody. You'll always need a cheer squad behind you, even if that's a cheer squad of one. And don't give up, keep following your dreams. If you really believe that this is something that's going to make a difference, or it's a viable idea, if it's a business, don't give up. I think one thing that somebody told me really, really early on, who was one of the people I'm saying was at the conference that I have a lot of respect for, was, there are dark days ahead. And this was before we had our initial funding. I met with her and she said, it's just really important that, you have ups and downs in your life, and especially when you're starting out a business. And all you have to do is make sure that every day you just put one foot in front of another and keep your head down and just keep pushing forward. And one day you will break through all of those walls, all of those barriers that are in the place, but you've just got to keep moving forward no matter how slow that journey is.
Thank you. Now, one more thing. If someone wants to donate, can they do it via your website?
Yes, they can do it through our website or follow us on social media.
Yes.
And we have, hopefully, just waiting for final approval, a big fundraising event coming up on Bondi Beach in December.
Yes.
So we'll stay in touch with you. And then if people want to attend or volunteer for that, then we would love them to be in touch.
Yes, absolutely. Sounds good. Thank you so much, Rachael, for your time.